Uh, your own business. Your father was successful in real estate, obviously been highly successful. What did you learn from your father?
Well, he loved to work and he was happy. He was a happy man. He wasn't, one of these guys, and I know many of them, and you know many of them, they're in their psychiatrist every day. I say, what do you do? My father was a worker and he loved to work. He'd work on Saturdays, he'd work on Sundays. He just liked it. He'd go to church, but after church, he'd go and work. He'd go check a building that he was putting up in Brooklyn. He was mostly in Brooklyn and Queens. And he just loved it. And I think more than anything else, not because of what he taught me lots of different things, but I watched him be a happy man and work until he was like literally 93. He was 93 years old when he died. And I said to myself, that's a pretty good formula because I have a lot of friends, they take vacations for 6 weeks and 8 weeks and 3 months, and they're never happy. So I watched my father, so I like to work.
Talking about setbacks, you went through that period. Rupert Murdoch took a huge hit then, was almost on the ground. Larry Ellison. What did you, one, learn from it? And two, what have you taught your kids about what you've been through? Life is not a straight line.
Right. From my standpoint, and as your folks know very well here, this is, even though we've had sort of a real estate meltdown, this has been a good time for me. I sold a house in Palm Beach for the highest, but we got $100 million for a house in Palm Beach, and Lehman Brothers happened the following week. So that's called good timing, right? And I'm trying to buy the house back now for a much smaller price. Sort of interesting when you see some of the deals that happen as time, but I became much more conservative because friends of mine who were really good developers and others in real estate, and some enemies of mine, which I didn't mind, went bust. They were gone, never to be seen again. And I've really become much more conservative in that standpoint. I did learn from the early '90s and the end of the '80s, but really it's like literally February of 1990. That was just like if a stock went down, you could see it in the real estate world. And I sort of came up with a statement that your magazine wrote about, and it was survive till 95. I actually had that statement. I just felt if you could survive for that period of time, and it really happened. I mean, survive till 95. And those of us that survived till 95, which was about a 4 to 5 year stretch, ended up doing pretty well. And today my company is much bigger, much better than it ever has been in the past. But I think I've become much more conservative. We have a lot of cash.
You
I'm
hate that.
always, I don't sleep well because I have cash. I never had cash. I mean, I was always like a little bit low on the cash because I'd make a deal. It would be a great deal. I'd make another deal, great deal. Then I'd take the profits from that and I'd have it spent before the money even came in. And that's okay too. The problem with that is that when things get bad, and they always do at some point, you've got to fight too hard. And I don't want to do that.
Gets to your children. You have three of them in the business now. How did you coax them? How did that come about? Because usually, if a parent wants you to do it, kids say no. If you want
Right.
it, I don't want it.
I was blessed to have smart children. They did well in school. They got good marks. They didn't have problems. But also, I
What
would,
kind of environment you create for that to happen? Because you have a lot of smart kids who just
right, you have many smart
bluff.
kids that don't do well, and you have some kids that aren't so smart that work very hard that do very well. I mean, I've seen it many times. But I've been recognized for having done a good job. Now, I have 5 children, but the three that are in business, and a lot of it's because of the success of The Apprentice, where they go on and people get to know Ivanka and Don and Eric. But a lot of that was early upbringing. I'd always say to them, no drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes. And now I add for Barron, and I'd drive them crazy. I'd say every time they'd leave, no drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes. Repeat after me. And I'd have to repeat. They go, Ivanka would go, Dad, will you leave me alone? But I drum it into their heads. And you have to get back, you have to get through those artificial barriers. I call them artificial barriers because you can do something about it until it's too late. Once it's in your system, it's very hard to stop. Like, I don't drink, and it's very easy for me not to drink. I tell people, what are you drinking for? What are you drinking for? And they don't even understand what I'm saying
So how
because
how
it's
did, how did you? It's amazing when people see you; they can't imagine. No, no, no alcohol.
oh, would I be in trouble if I was a drinker with
No,
my
no,
life?
no, 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 no smoking,
Yeah, no smoking. Well,
and no drugs.
I had a brother, Fred, who was sadly an alcoholic, a serious alcoholic. And He was the best looking guy you've ever seen.
And he was much older than you.
He was much older. He was 10 years older than me, 11 years older than me. And he was as good looking a guy as you've ever seen. He had everything going. The best personality. I have like a bad personality compared to Fred, but he started drinking, and he also smoked a lot. But he started drinking, and I think it started in college, frankly, but it got progressively worse. And he was really unable to stop. And he'd always tell me, don't you ever drink. So he was much older than me, and it really has an impact, when you have that kind of an age difference. But he'd point, don't you ever drink and don't you ever smoke. He'd add the smoking in because he smoked and he drank. And it hugely affected his health and hugely affected even his look and his, the whole bearing. And every time he'd see me, he'd say, don't you ever drink and don't you. So I never drank. I mean, I really, when you talk about my father, I learned a lot from my father, but I learned a lot from my brother, Fred. And he set an example. It wasn't maybe the example that people would think, but it really was, in its own way, an example.
So what do you do about succession? You have three up-and-comers.
Well, I do. And maybe 5. I really have good children. Your father, who was a friend of mine, who I thought the world of him. And he obviously did something right, because you've kept it all going beautifully with the so-called kids. I have it's a very tough decision, because you say, do you leave a bigger chunk to one? Do you break it up evenly? Do you do this? Do you do that? I think my inclination is to put, for instance, Eric loves the club business. We've really built a big club business, and it's been doing well. We're on the cover of a major club magazine that we're the most profitable one in the business now, and it's great. And we've done really well with it, and I like the business. It works for my personality. And Eric seems to love that business. And Don loves running buildings. He loves 40 Wall Street. He loves Trump Tower. He loves other buildings that we have. And I'm sort of thinking that if it keeps going like this, I can put one in charge of certain aspects. But it's very complex. In a way, it's the most complex thing. And you understand that through your family and your children and, what's going to happen here and there. It's a very, very important decision and a very complex decision. And you and I have seen many fights over the years, and we've seen fights of, individuals that are business people, and we've seen family fights. And I would say, and we could mention a couple of them, but I would say the most vicious fights I've ever seen, whether it's Koch or Milstein or this or that, the most vicious fights are those inter-family fights when it doesn't work. So it really is a very important decision as to what happens when we're gone.